There is a very specific kind of disappointment that hits when nothing actually changes, but somehow everything feels kinda worse, you know? Not because the thing itself got worse, but because the way you experience it suddenly shifts. And the best way I can describe it is when you buy, a piece of expensive tech you were really excited for, only for people to suddenly start calling it mid, and people unleash, Gojo's domain expansion on you, point out every flaw you never noticed, and suddenly you can't unsee any of them anymore. And just like you can't unsee those flaws, I can't unsee the temperature change and the loss of all the food I had to give to Link in Breath of the Wild to get to that last fucking temple in the snow region without dying to unlock the glider and progress the whole story. And that whole shift hits the hardest in one specific type of environment: snow environments. One of the clearest examples of that for me was Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games on a DS. You're running through snowy towns like Frost Town, doing missions, talking to characters, unlocking new areas, and I can still remember that vibe very well. The music felt more spaced out, the world a bit, quieter, and moving from one objective to the next stopped feeling like rushing. And you see the same thing in something like Mafia 2. You're still just driving, doing the missions, going from point A to B. But once the city is covered in snow, it reads very differently. The lighting softens, the streets feel quieter, and even just standing still suddenly feels very noticeable. And that's what I want to figure out in this video: why snow levels stick so hard and how they can completely change how a game feels only with changing the weather. And the thing that makes snow levels so interesting is that they were affecting how games felt long before games had the technology to make snow look convincing, before footprints leaving behind, particle effects, dynamic weather, and before physics engines trying to simulate every slippery little snowflakes. Developers were already making winter feel different with way less. They did not need the realism and graphics at all. They needed suggestion like pale color palettes, more empty space, a quieter backdrop, maybe movement that felt just a little less stable than usual. And suddenly the exact same game starts landing very differently. And that's the part I think people really underestimate. Snow levels were not powerful because they became realistic, but they were powerful before they ever got the chance to, have the most realistic graphics ever. And you can already see that in something as simple as skiing on the Atari 2600, which is made by Activision and came out in December 1980, which technically makes it the first dedicated snow game / level ever. It is barely more than a widescreen skier skiing around and obstacles. But even there, the snow does not feel neutral at all, and the space feels much harsher because there is almost nothing in it. I mean, there are no rich details, no fancy effects, and no little visual comforts for your eye to grab onto. Like, there's no eye candy at all. It's just you, the course, and the knowledge that if you mess up, it's going to feel very stupid immediately. And that is what makes it work. The technical limitation does not kill the atmosphere, it actually very much sharpens it, and the emptiness makes the danger feel much cleaner, and that exposure is basically the point. And that's really the first big thing to understand about snow levels. Older games could not sell winter through realism, so they had to sell it through perception. Developers had to ask simpler questions like, how do you make space feel colder without realistic weather? How do you make the player slow down a little without introducing some giant new mechanic? And the answer to that, a lot of the time, was to make the world feel flatter, quieter, and less readable. A pale background could make the level feel colder, and less visual clutter could make it feel emptier. Slightly awkward movement could make it feel uncertain. None of that is flashy, but it is smart, and it gets right to the player's experience. And you can start to feel the idea evolving once you start comparing games across different eras. In Donkey Kong Country, the snow levels are still built on the same platform you already know, but the moment a blizzard starts messing with the visibility, your confidence very much drops. Then you get something like Midwinter, where the hardware still cannot do anything close to modern snow simulation, but snow stops being just a themed area and becomes part of the whole identity of the world. It affects scale, mood, and isolation in a way that feels much bigger than the technology should have allowed. And then when you get to play a level like Cool Mountain, which is from Super Mario 64 and came out in 1996, It's where snow stops feeling like a theme and starts feeling like an actual space you have to deal with. The moment you drop in, it's very much active. Snow is falling, the music is playing in the background, a giant penguin is already waiting, and the whole level is built vertically. You're climbing up narrow paths, crossing thin wooden bridges, and constantly seeing how far you could fall. It's very playful, bright, and very much Mario, but the structure of the mountain makes you aware of height. Then the snow and ice starts doing its thing. You slide a little too far, turns feel slightly delayed, and small mistakes carry more weight than you expect. The level never becomes punishing, but it quietly removes just enough control to keep you honest. You're still moving very fast and still jumping around like normal, but you're never fully on autopilot when it comes to actually, you know, using the controls, and that's what makes it work. It's not empty or melancholic at all like uh, Ryan Gosling here, but it's very playful with just enough instability underneath it that you can't completely trust the ground you're standing on. And that's what snow levels do at its best. It does not always change the rules of the game, but it changes how reliable those rules feel. In Coco Mountain, that comes through playful instability. You're still doing normal Mario things, but the snow, the slopes, and the sense of height makes every movement feel a little less automatic. And once you notice that, the bigger pattern starts to come into focus. Snow is so effective because it can make familiar spaces feel less certain, less readable, and just unstable enough that you stop moving on pure instinct. The game itself may not have changed much, but your confidence inside it has. Yeah, you can see it really clearly in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, which is interesting because they are running on basically the same tech, but their snow areas feel completely different. In Ocarina of Time, for example, winter shows up as something frozen in place. Zora's domain is locked under ice, the ice cavern is quiet and almost empty, and the whole space feels like it has been paused. There's barely any movement or any noise. It's just this cold, still environment where every feels distant and slightly lifeless. The lack of activity does something to how you read the actual space. You slow down, you pay more attention, and it starts feeling less like you're exploring and more like you're stepping into something that's not supposed to be alive anymore. And then Majora's Mask takes the exact same foundation and pushes it in the opposite direction. Snowhead is not still, it's rather very hostile. The wind is constantly blowing and that space is bigger, rougher, and more dangerous. And the cold feels like something that is actively working against you. You're not just moving through the snow, but you're actually dealing with it. The Garans are suffering, the environment feels unstable, and everything about the area pushes this idea that the world is not safe right now. But under all of that, the same trick is happening. Your movement has not fundamentally changed, but your confidence in the space really has, and you hesitate more, you read distances more carefully, and you stop trusting things at a glance. And then Donkey Kong Country's Snow Barrel Blast takes that same idea and weaponizes it. Instead of using snow to create stillness or atmosphere, actually uses it to mess with your timing directly. The blizzard cuts your visibility, and suddenly jumps you could normally do without thinking starts feeling very risky, and you're not reacting to new mechanics. You are very much reacting to the uncertainty. That's the whole trick. It's not changing the rules, but it's changing how safe those rules feel. And honestly, that's such a nasty little design move that I kinda have to respect it. And once games start leaning more into ice, the effect gets even more physical, and this is where snow and winter stops just changing atmosphere and starts changing behavior. The second your character slides too far or takes longer to stop or carries more momentum that you expected, the game stops feeling automatic, and you cannot just walk, you actually have to commit to it. Pokemon's ice areas are a perfect example. For example, the snow gym in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and Platinum. You know, one wrong step and it can send you all the way across the room, so movement stops being casual and becomes predictive, and you're not just deciding where to go, but you're trying to think 2 or 3 steps ahead to actually reach the gym leader. And that is such a smart use of limitation too, because older games could not create realistic winter surfaces, and so instead they exaggerated a single property of ice and turned that into gameplay language. They could not simulate snow perfectly, so they focused on one thing winter does to movement and made that the whole point. And that's why this whole topic is bigger than just graphics. Everything you just saw was already working before ray tracing, before proper accumulation, and any of the modern stuff people now point out to when they talk about immersion. Better technology added detail, but it did not invent the whole effect of it. Developers already understood what winter does to a space. It clears things out, exposes distance, softens some details while making others stand out, and most importantly, it makes movement feel less automatic, and snow levels can evoke different kind of atmospheres and different kinds of emotion. For example, you can make it more cozy, with adding more contrast to it, like warm colors, or you can make it more melancholic and cruel, for example, or more empty. The tools evolve, but the core idea stay the same. And what makes that idea so powerful is that it is not tied to one specific emotion, like I said. It amplifies whatever the game is already trying to do. In SSX 3, the mountain feels bigger, faster, more dangerous because the snow sharpens that sense of speed and skill. But in Animal Crossing and Stardew Valley, the exact same seasonal shift does the opposite. The world quiets down, the music softens, and familiar spaces start feeling warmer and more personal. Nothing fundamental changes, but everything lands very much differently. That's why snow works across so many games. It is not a mood by itself, but it's more like a multiplier. And that's why snow levels are my favorite type of, environments in video games and any type of media. You can see the idea carry all the way into more modern games as well. In Mafia 2, you're still doing completely normal open world stuff, but once Empire Base covered in snow and it's a little bit night, the entire city starts reading differently. The roads feel heavier, the air feels quieter, and the lights stand out more. It's not one big feature doing the work, but it is a stack of smaller details that slowly change how the whole place feels to move through. And that's also why something like Spider-Man Miles Morales also works so well, just like Mafia 2 on the other end of the timeline. By that point, the hardware can do all the stuff older games could only hint at, like snow builds up on rooftops and cars, and lights reflect off wet streets, particle effects that make the air feel very much alive, and winter clothing, visibility lighting. All of it comes together in a much more detailed way. But the reason that version of New York feels so good in the snow is not just because it looks impressive, it is because all the technology is still serving the same core idea. The city feels softer, colder, more festive, and more intimate at the same time. Like swinging through it does not just feel fast, but it feels seasonal. Seasonal. And everything gains a slightly different emotional weight because winter changes how spaces read. Thank you. That is really the through line across all of this. From something as simple as skiing on the Atari all the way to a modern open world city, the fidelity changes completely, but the underlying idea does not. The fact that snow changes perception first and everything else comes after that. And some of my strongest gaming memories are tied to exactly that kind of winter pacing, waking up early, still half asleep on a Saturday morning, playing on the Wii with my brother and uncle, eating leftovers from the night before, and having those snowy levels somehow match the mood of the room perfectly, like cold on the screen, warmth around us. That contrast is a huge part of why those moments stuck, not because the design was objectively revolutionary, but because it connected to something. And I think that's what the best snow levels have always understood. No matter the era, better hardware gave developers better tools, but the core idea was already there from the start. And the moment a world turns white, everything inside it starts to feel different. Okay, so as you can see, it's 1:26 at night, and I'm gonna talk way softer right now, but I hope the whole monologue is still and sound is still convincing enough to keep it as interesting as possible. Anyway, let's continue with the video. And there's also another shift that happens the moment a game becomes a snow level, and this one has less to do with what you see and more to do with what you hear, or more accurately, what you stop hearing. And snow level don't make a game louder. In the opposite, they strip things back. The mix gets cleaner and the clutter drops away, and because of that, there's less competing for your attention. The sounds that remain start hitting harder, and you just stop passively hearing the game and start actually listening to the space around you, like every little detail, like maybe a branch or maybe an animal that's running around. And that shift happens faster than you think because your brain immediately notices when something goes missing. The moment the noise disappears, everything that's left suddenly feels intentional. A footstep is no longer just movement, but it's presence. A gust of wind isn't background anymore, it's direction. And snow doesn't just change the sound of a game, but it changes what your ears start to care about. And so, look, don't you think that everything at night just feels way louder than when it happens during the day? Like, let's say you drop something, like maybe a glass, whatever. It is way louder at night than actually in day, because when the sun is up, there's a lot more noise and a lot more other things that you hear. But when it's dark and everyone is sleeping and you're the only one up, going downstairs for a midnight snack, every little noise is very, very present. And it works because snow already does this in real life too. Like it dampens sound, soften edges, and creates this strange sense of distance where everything feels slightly removed from you. And that can go into two completely different directions. The first one is when it's gentle, it feels calm and almost reflective, like the world is giving you the space to actually think. But when that same quiet sits on top of pressure, it stops feeling peaceful and starts feeling wrong. Too empty and too still, like something should be there but isn't. And games exploit that whole thing, that split constantly. It's the same idea we talked about earlier. Suggestion first and then, the vitality later. And that's also why snow audio falls apart the moment it tries too hard. The power of it is not in adding more, but it's more like removing enough. And the second everything starts competing again, the whole effect disappears, and what makes it work is selectivity. A single sound matters more when it doesn't have to fight off for attention. That's why in something like the long dark, every sound feels like it has a job. Wa- Wind, footsteps, a distant howl of a wolf. None of it is decorative, and you're not just hearing the environment, but you're actually reading it and experience it. The quiet doesn't calm you down, but it forces you to pay attention because there's nothing there to hide behind, and that flips your role from observer to participant without the game ever, telling you it did. But that same principle can flip completely depending on what the game puts in its space. Red Dead Redemption 2 doesn't use snow to create tension in the same way it uses to create exposure. The world feels wider, emptier, and more distant, not because there is nothing there, but because there's less sound connecting you to it. Movement feels very heavy, and space feel bigger, and the silence make everything feel just a little more isolated. And I personally think putting the snow chapter in the very beginning of the game was not a good move because it was kind of slow and very a little bit boring. I think if they have put, the snow chapter later on, like maybe chapter 2 or 3, it would be much enjoyable, as you already know, like the characters, the world, etc., etc. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just my opinion. Maybe you really enjoy the snow chapter in the beginning. Anyway, moving on to Frostpunk, it pushes it even further in the opposite direction. There, the soundscape is built around pressure, wind, machinery, strain, and because everything else is stripped away, those harsh sounds land harder than they normally would. The quiet isn't peaceful, it feels loaded, like the world is constantly on the edge of breaking. Same system, but completely different emotion. I mean, just listen to it. You see, and when you see it in one level, you see it in the other one. Eventually, you see it in every snow level. That snow doesn't have one sound. It creates a cleaner stage, and whatever the game places on that stage becomes the emotion. Whether it's tension, isolation, calm, pressure, even speed in something like SSX 3, where the lack of noise makes movement cut through harder. It's all the same move, but if you remove enough, and what remains starts carrying the whole weight of it. And that's basically what snow is doing to your ears. It's deciding what matters, and you're not just hearing the environment anymore, but you're actively paying attention on it. Now, finally, after being the guy on this side of the bus, I wanna move on and go to my favorite part. I wanna be like that guy, smiling at the sun and looking at the scenery. There's a very specific thing that winter levels do better than almost anything else in games. And it's honestly such a simple trick that it almost feels stupid once you notice it. You spend time outside where everything feels cold, white, and a little harder to read, and then once you step inside and it feels like pulling a 4 pound heavy blanket over you on a cold Monday morning when you really don't want to get up for work. Like Candlehearth Hall in Windhell. A little warm room in Snowdin, a hut, maybe a tavern, a shop, some hallway with yellow lamps and wooden walls and a fire off to the side where you can hear it crackling. Outside, you were moving through the cold, hard, cruel nature of winter levels, but inside you slow down, you turn the camera a little, you stand there longer than you need to. Little magic tricks winter levels actually have. It does not just make a place look cold, but it makes shelter matter more. In a normal level, for example, a room is just a room. You walk in, maybe there's an item, maybe an NPC, maybe nothing, and then you just keep going. But in a winter level, that same room suddenly feels like relief, like stepping into Kindlehearth Hall in Windhelm in The Elder Scrolls V. After walking through that freezing gray city where everything feels, dead and exposed, or walking into Papyrus House in Snowdin in Undertale where the music softens and suddenly nothing is trying to kill you anymore. Or even something like the Duke's carriage in Resident Evil Village when you find him in the snowy village, just sitting there, warm, safe, completely disconnected from everything outside, like spotting a lit window in the mountains near Coulter in Red Dead Redemption 2, where just seeing light already feels like a little bit of progress. And even something as little as a window starts feeling like a barrier between you and the harsh, cruel cold looking out from inside a cabin in Mystery Lake in the long dark where you can literally see the weather, trying its best to kill you. And if you have placed that same room in a, you know, regular city environment where it's summer, it would not have the same effect as it does in the winter season because it makes the outside look much harsher, and because of that even small signs of warmth starts carrying more weight than they normally would. You can see it in how fast your priorities changes. You are outside dealing with wind, snow, distance, or whatever the game's throwing at you, like climbing through Hebra in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where the cold is actively draining you, and then you step into a stable like Snowfield Stable, and suddenly you're not thinking about survival anymore. Now you're just standing there near a fire, cooking something, doing nothing for a second. Progression is not really the main thing anymore, but I mean, now you're just looking at a chair next to a fire like it's a god given blessing you didn't know you needed. And yeah, maybe that sounds dumb, but it is true. A chair, a mug, a bit of yellow light like the little interiors in Snow Peak Ruins in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, where everything feels worn and barely holding together. Really, none of that should hit that hard on its own. But after enough exposure, it stops feeling optional and starts feeling like something you actually want to stay near to. Cold makes the warmth matter more. Exposure makes shelter matter more. Distance makes closeness matter more. Winter levels are incredibly good at making ordinary human things feel weirdly important. I like my guy Orochimaru said, you start appreciating things when you when you just when you just lose it, when you just lost it. I think something like that. And the game absolutely knows you are doing this. Matter of fact, it is designed to make you do these type of things. You walk into one of these spaces and your behavior changes immediately, like slowing down, looking around more, staying longer than you need to. Yes, that before leaving, think about how long people just stand around in Snowdin, in Undertale exploring the whole thing, or how you linger inside a random tavern. In Skyrim, instead of immediately going back out into the storm, designers talk about this kind of space as a form of passive guidance, where the environment itself, not just players' behavior, without the explicit instructions. You're not told to stay, but everything about the space is built to make staying feel like the correct choice. And a lot of that comes down to contrast and readability. In the color theory, warm tones like orange and yellow naturally pull attention and feel psychologically closer, while cold tones like blue and white feel distant and less inviting. Snow levels exaggerate that difference. Look at how Snowden pushes you through desaturated blues and whites outside and then immediately switches to warm brown and soft lightning indoors. Skyrim does the same thing with firelight and candlelight cutting through cold gray stone. And that's not just aesthetic, that's visual hierarchy. The warm space becomes the focal point because your brain is wired to read it as safer and more immediate. And it's not only the colors doing the work, the layout reinforces that even further. Interiors are much more smaller, more contained and easier to read. Environmental psychology calls this the prospect refuge effect. Open spaces give you visibility but also a lot of exposure, while enclosed spaces gives you protection and a sense of control. Snow levels lean very hard into that. Outside you have distance, wind, and low visibility and constant uncertainty. But inside, you get tight walls, stable lighting, a clear structure. Back again to Snowden, characters are spaced in a way that invites you to walk between them instead of past them. In Skyrim taverns, everything is arranged around a central fire, pulling you towards it without you thinking about it. Bethesda designers have talked about this kind of environmental storytelling for years, placing objects and light sources intentionally so players gravitate towards points of interest. The game is not just giving you safety, but it's giving you a reason to actually slow down. And then the moment you leave again, all of that disappears. You're back into the wind, like stepping out of a cabin into a blizzard in the long dark. Back into the open, like riding out from Coulter in Red Dead Redemption 2, where everything immediately feels heavier again. Back into that slight discomfort, like leaving a stable in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and instantly taking the cold damage again, which is very annoying. And and the prices you have to pay for the winter clothes is outrageous. The cold stops feeling like just atmosphere and starts feeling like opposition. And that same thing happens in Uncharted 2 when you're moving through those icy mountain paths and caves with Tenzin. The place is very beautiful, but it's also very unstable, freezing, and dangerous, which means every little bit of cooperation and every little pause in that pressure matters more than it would in some neutral biome. Snow keeps doing that and it turns support into something you actually value. And sometimes it does it through pure hostility. Shadow Moses is great for this because the snow there is not festive or soft at all. It is tactical. It changes how you move, how you hide, and how enemies read the space and how they read you. The footprints in the snow, the footprints in the snow become the footprints in the snow become a problem. The cold air, the visibility in the empty space, all of it turns the environment into part of the encounter. The cliffhanger mission in Modern Warfare 2 does something very similar. Snow is helping you and screwing you over at the same time. Gives the mission its scale, its danger, and that weird mix of stealth and spectacle. And that's why comfort and contrast work so well in winter settings. The exterior does not just sit there, but it sometimes also pressures you. I know this is not something video games related, but I think it's very much worthy to mention it. Sometimes snow pushes it even further by stripping everything else down first. And I had that exact feeling reading, Steel Ball Run during the Sugar Mountain arc. That whole sequence is just pressure, and every decision backfires, and every game turns into a loss, and they cannot really slow down without making things worse again. And the snow makes that hit harder because it clears everything out. The space feels flatter, quieter, and more exposed, like there is nowhere for that tension to hide. And then it ends, the noise drops, and it's just, Johnny Joestar and Gyro's happily standing there while the snow keeps falling. And Gyro tries to make it human again, tries to bring in some warmth back into the moment, and Johnny just cannot meet him right there. He just really sounds empty, and that lands because the snow does not soften anything. It isolates it and it removes everything except what is actually there. The snow does not automatically make something emotional, but it strips the space down. It strips this space down enough that whatever feeling is already there starts hitting harder, and you only pay attention to what's going on in the scene. What I find really funny is every time I open Instagram or TikTok or Twitter, I always see those Johnny Vaughns targeting Netflix, and I just recently saw Clash of Clans doing its own version doing its own version on Twitter with, saying release the episode. I mean, it's way better, if they release it weekly. That just really sucks. That's also why lighting matters so much in snowy spaces too. The snow simplifies the environment so aggressively that even a tiny bit of warmth becomes impossible to ignore. And when everything is white, blue, gray, desaturated, whatever, one warm light cuts straight through it like butter. Whether it is a lamp, a fire, a lit window, your eyes go there immediately. And that's not random, that is also design. And the snow clears everything else back, and now the warm thing does not just look nice, but it feels like the right place to go to. Small details actually do very much of the heavy lifting. If outside is just a flat layer of white, the effect falls apart, but when snow feels physical, when it blows across the screen, gathers in corners, changes how the world sounds. Remember where you walked. The cold stops being visual and starts feeling real. Skyrim does this with constant drifting snow and low visibility that makes the air itself feel hostile. Animal Crossing goes the opposite direction, softer but just as effective, with snow settling on edges, muffled sound, and a quieter atmosphere. Red Dead Redemption 2 pushes it further by making the snow heavy and reactive, leaving footprints tracking movement and holding impact. The more convincing that outside space is, the more relief you feel when the game finally lets you step out of it. And in Animal Crossing, that relief is not tied to danger, but it's tied to familiarity. Winter does not add drama, it adds weight to small things. Snow sits where it should, the world sounds different, and everything slows down just enough to feel lived in. You're not rushing through your village anymore, but you're walking through it. And that's the difference between a location and a place you actually want to stay in. And that's why something like Brewster Cafe hits harder in winter. It's always like, it was always nice, but winter just makes it more nice, and the nice matters more. And if you want the opposite version, look at Red Dead Redemption 2 or Journey, and those games are not trying to make snow cozy, but they make it actually a problem, like in many other games. It slows you down, interferes with movement, reduces visibility, changes how the world reads. But that is exactly why the comfort also works, because the more the outside pushes you back, the more any break from it matters. Stronger exterior is stronger contrast, and snow does not need to be magical, but it just needs to feel like something you're dealing with. In another setting, a cafe or a warm room is background, but in the snow levels it becomes the whole center, and that's what people remember. Not just the snow, but what the snow did to everything around it. A bonfire, a town theme, a little hallway, a cabin, or just standing inside for 10 seconds longer than necessary. And I think that's why something like Mario Sonic at the Olympic Winter Games on the DS stayed with me for so long. Back then it just felt fun. I remember mashing the L and R buttons so hard during those ice skating events that I practically ruined them. Replaying the same sections over and over again. Running through the story mode like it was the greatest thing ever. It is actually a very great story mode. In the moment it felt fast, energetic, and almost chaotic, but looking back, that's not really what stayed with me. What stayed with me was how clean everything felt. The sound, the space, the way nothing really got in the way of what I was doing. There was no overload or unnecessary noise dragging my attention in 10 different directions. It was just me, the movement, and the moment. I mean, they do not have to completely reinvent the mechanics to change the experience. In fact, they strip things back, they lower the noise, they make space, and once that space is there, whatever the game is really trying to make you feel becomes harder to ignore. I mean, if it wants to make you feel fair, it feels more exposed. Loneliness feels bigger, comfort feels warmer, and melancholy lingers longer. Even something playful can suddenly feel a little, more winter wonderland, magical Harry Potter kind of vibes. And to give you a short summary of this whole video is that snow works in so many different ways. In one game it makes the world feel harsher, and in another it makes it quieter. Something else, in another it makes it feel more intimate or more reflective or more alive. The emotion changes, but the effect is strangely consistent. Snow clears away enough of the excess that the heart of a place finally has the room to breathe. And once a game gives you that feeling, even for a few minutes, it tends to stay with you way longer than you expect. If there's a winter area in a game that made you feel exactly like any of this, Tell me what it is down below in the comments. I genuinely want to know which snowy places your brain still refuses to uninstall years later. And if you're into the, and if you, and if you're into these, slower, more, and if you're into these slower, more atmospheric deep dives where you spend way too much time over analyzing why a lamp in a blizzard can emotionally ruin a person, you know, dropping a like, comment, or subscribe really helps. And take care. And I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye bye.